I am pleased to share with you this session on preparing Impressionist repertoire. In this great period of composition, the Impressionist movement was clearly seen in visual art, music, and poetry. I will share ideas for guiding students to play impressionistic music with a beautiful sound, from well-intentioned physical gestures. I will explore famous Impressionist works as well as rarely played gems for pre-college students. Pre-impressionistic piano music will also be discussed, as it is such a valuable gateway for younger students into the sound and imagery of this style of music. Please follow along with our two handouts. The first is a handout of musical examples we will go through today. The second handout has a list of works from easy to advanced, as well as an overview of technical and musical characteristics students learn when studying this genre of repertoire. Also in the second handout, the boxes that have bullets to the left are those that will be demonstrated. This list by no means is complete, and I certainly encourage you to add more pieces to it. Almost any work at the end of the 1800s could be considered on its way to Impressionism. A composer named Ernest Finelli studied at the Paris Conservatory at the late 1800s, but then he was expelled. One reviewer of his music said that he had radical musical innovations that later led to Debussy. As we know, Monet created many of his beautiful watercolor paintings at his home in Giverny, France. And this is a beautiful picture of part of his home and part of his fabulous garden. The composer and pianist Emmanuel Chabrier spent time with the French Impressionist painters and was the first collector of their art. As a composer, Chabrier is most known for the work España, as well as other fantastic works for orchestra, two pianos, and piano solo. In the great Muséum d'Orsay in Paris, there is a large painting of Chabrier at the piano and with his painter friends. For this special topic, I would like to begin with the composer Gabriel Fauré. His refined music influenced the course of modern French music. Not only was he the director of the Paris Conservatory, he also taught Debussy and Ravel. Fauré made a lasting impression on both of them. Debussy and Ravel said that Fauré never criticized or reprimanded, only suggested. With a harmonically complex style, Fauré's music linked Romanticism with the modernism of the 20th century. And you might be wondering, who was Fauré's teacher? Well, it was the great pianist and composer Cézanne, who became a lifelong friend. Fauré was in a National Society of Music which promoted new French music, along with Chabrier, Bizet, César Franck, and others. Fauré met Liszt and Wagner, but was not influenced by either of them. He believed in using dissonance, mild discords, and color effects, and these anticipated the effects of the Impressionist composers. So let's go ahead and turn to our handout on page 2 and 3, and let's take a look at Fauré's Capriccio. goodness. In the beginning of this work, let's have our students put the damper pedal down to raise the dampers and let the full essence of the piano come out and waft through the resonance of the room. Right, that sounds so much differently than this. Right, the second one, it's almost you're just lurching into a sound where with the damper pedal on first, it's like you have a beautiful bed that you just lie in. So that helps the dolce sound. You'll notice that Fauré uses all these wonderful parallel fourths that Debussy used later on. Such interweaving of melodic lines in this piece is just beautiful. So we can talk about colors at the top of the page. I thought about this as a forest green in the right hand. And then maybe a chilly light blue. Now, this section of the piece poses a few challenges for students. First of all, we don't want our students to play with stretched fingers and reaching for keys like their starfish hands. So instead, every time they play or they finish playing a note or a key, they must transfer their weight to the finger that is next being used. So the fifth and the fourth finger, as soon as the student moves to the second finger, their fifth and their fourth finger must move along to their second finger. That's very important. And the other thing that's important is have students practice it with these beautiful full tissue box touch releases. And they can stop on any of these big beats. And this helps students that are tightly wound up and they're nervous and they've got their arms right by their sides. They need to open up the sound and they need to open up their entire physique. The other thing that's really important with arpeggio playing, it will be very much more efficient to not twist the wrist when trying to play legato. So instead, we are going to fly over. We're going to fly over and we're going to let our hand and our fingers feel like they're sanding a piece of wood. And then we have to get that thumb out from underneath the palm. So we don't want the thumb to be stuck there. And we also don't want the thumb to prepare the very next note it plays, or else it's going to be stretching the hand. So the thumb can just naturally just prepare a few keys away. And there's another flying finger. I love this section at the end where you come through all this wonderful passionate area and then it's like a little smiling mermaid coming up to the shore. The other thing about this wonderful piece is that the pedaling is not on every beat, because otherwise, listen to what it would sound like with pedal changes every beat. It's too funny. So here we have much longer pedals. There is so much listening that needs to take place when students are playing advanced repertoire and impressionist repertoire. So instead of having a student, you keep the pedal down and then changing it on the next big beat, you could have them come up with a pedal and then put the pedal down so we can connect the melodic notes. Let's take a look at the handout on page 4, and let's take a look at Fauré's Pavane, which is of the intermediate level in this arrangement. I'd like to share with you another piece by Fauré, the Pavane, just because it's such a popular piece. And this particular arrangement is by Timothy Brown. The orchestral version is really beautiful, and a flutist plays the main melody. You all know this. And on the second page, Fauré starts to put in some 2s against 3s. And I was thinking to myself, why were they ever called 2s against 3s? Isn't that kind of depressing, right? It's like they're at war with each other. Why don't we just call them 2s with 3s? And that way it'll be happier and more joy-filled. So if you have any students, like some of mine, the 2s with 3s are pretty challenging, right? And the important thing is for students to never stop listening to each of their parts. So they must play this hands apart with the triplets, and then this nice steady, steady 8th notes in the left hand. And when they get to those sections with 2s with 3s, and they can stop right there. Stop there again. So really listening for the rhythm. And this motion, it's so much healthier for a student to think in a beautiful physical way, these beautiful phrases. So they could think that they're scooping ice cream out of a container. Very nice, isn't it? Okay, so that's all I really wanted to say about that lovely Pavane. Debussy lived from 1862 to 1918, outliving his famous teacher by 6 years. In the 1870s, the Impressionistic style emerged. A good definition of the term is, Impressionism is a visual imprint of the moment, especially with the shifting effects of water, sun, or the moon. The Impressionist painter Monet said that the principal subject in a painting is light. Now let's take a look at our handout on page 5. Let's take a look at the first arabesque from Festival Collection, Book 7. What is an arabesque, students might often ask? This particular art form has its origins in Arabic and Roman times. You can see here a beautiful example from the Alhambra in Spain. Debussy pushed the ideals of the old masters. It is important to remember that his music does not have strict boundaries. Debussy believed he adhered more to the symbolist poets than to the idea of Impressionism, even though history has tied Debussy with Impressionism. So what is symbolism? It began with a French poet named Mallarmé. He lived from 1842 to 1898. Symbolists used the inexplicable, such as dreams and visions, and gave them form. Other subjects were the sea, birds, the sun, the moon, silver and gold, water, air, and fire. Symbolists made the invisible visible. Mallarmé was the poet who wrote the Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, and Debussy wrote his famous symphonic poem after reading this poem. The text of the poem is about the experiences of a faun who wakes up from his afternoon sleep and discusses his experiences with some nymphs in the forest. So this gorgeous piece that so many students want to play. Oh my goodness, we know that in order for the first couple of measures to be very supple and beautiful, the student has to use the fluidity of oval physical gestures. I don't say little circles, I say ovals, so that the student uses more of their arm. So I also tell our students, my goodness, I think I said before about scoops of ice cream. They can also think about a smiley face and making the smile of the smiley face every time they have to move like this, and then they have to go around the head of the smiley face, and then the smiley face again. And then we have lots of beautiful, soft, and flexible wrists. So at the part where the students are going into that ritardando, sometimes it doesn't seem so comfortable for them. And sometimes I say, can you imagine that you're in a fishing village and there's fog, but then you see this light from far, far away. And that helps them to make the ritardando and make this nice and quiet. Now this next section, this will only work, these 2s with 3s, if our physical gestures are really good. And the physical gestures are the key to evenness. Because if the student tries to play this section with locked wrists, there are wrong notes that will happen, and it won't be pleasant to listen to, and it won't be even. So I can experiment many times with my students so that we reach the physical gestures that make the most sense. And here you notice I have the students drop and then roll forward. And here they're dropping, they're still dropped, and then they roll forward. And then they roll forward, and they drop, and then they drop, and then they roll. Oh my goodness. Unit practicing. Once they can play that first unit, have them add on another unit. And then more. So often we have students that don't follow through with their physical gestures. So they end up hitting keys because they're locking up and they're not following through. So let's not have a hit here. And then let's melt into the next page. Not like the Wicked Witch of the West, just melting in just pure love for this piece. In the world of symbolist painters, they preferred to paint legendary or ancient themes and reacted against naturalism and realism. They were very focused on the art of the dream. So this first picture I'd like to share with you is by a German painter, and it is called, very interesting picture, isn't it? It's called Portrait with Death as a Fiddler. The second picture is by Redon. And I love Redon's later works where they're full of color and flowers, but this one is during his symbolist period. This one's called The Telltale Heart. The difference between symbolism and Impressionism is that the symbolists depicted the inner vision of the artist, whereas the Impressionist focused on nature and the real world. Debussy wrote, "Music is the expression of the moment of the waters, the play of curves described by changing breezes." And we can contemplate this as we look at a beautiful work by Timothy Brown called The Emerald Sea. This is on your handout, page 6 and 7. Here we are in the Emerald Sea world. And if you notice the picture that goes along with my talk, The sea is actually emerald green. I hope that you can see that. This wonderful piece by Timothy Brown certainly captures the feeling of Impressionism. So first of all, we want to make sure that our students are always sitting at the right height and distance from the piano. So when our students are seated correctly, we want them to put their longer fingers on the black keys, their smaller fingers, shorter fingers on the white keys, and we want to make sure that their elbows are slightly in front of their bodies. Okay. The other thing that we want them to observe is that their tips of their elbows are at the tops of the white keys. So this is where a student is most comfortable and has as much control and power as they will need to play the piano. We want to make sure that the feet are on the floor, nicely grounded, and that their legs and their torso forms a tripod. So we don't want to have our students bring their hands up like this to the fall board because it doesn't show anything as to where the distance is and the height of the elbow in relationship to the keys, and it also doesn't look very pianistic. So it just looks nice. If we do this, you can have your students move their elbows and their arms around so that they feel this nice, comfortable spot. In this lovely piece, in order for the sound to be really beautiful and for us to have completely fluid motions in the body, we would like our students to think about a gentle push off on every strong beat. And obviously, after I push forward, I come back towards my body. Let's see, the other thing that is a really good idea to do is you could have your students sit nice and tall and long at the bench and have them just do figure eights on either side of their body like this. In this way, they just get the feeling of a nice rolling motion in their arms and their elbows and their upper arms, and they don't have to move their shoulders around. The shoulders just stay nice and low and wide. And it also definitely makes sure this helps the student play with a nice long torso. In your handout on page 8 and 9, let's take a look at the Arabesque by David Karp. Here is another Arabesque. This one is much easier than the Debussy one, so it's terrific for our young students to learn something like this. So the objective is evenness and lightness, with a single line melody which kind of wafts through the air beautifully above this left hand beautiful arpeggiated pattern. So this is deceptively challenging because the left hand is all on white keys and they have to play very evenly. So they could think of course, that smiley face. They could think of an eye, a big eye. So they are following the contour of the top of the eye and then going around to the bottom of the eye. And definitely we want them to play on the side tip of their thumbnail when they play their thumbs. And lots of weight transfer. And the right hand has dropping and rolling motions. Roll and drop, roll and drop, roll. And it's interesting, as I was playing the left hand, I was getting a little bit tight, and then I realized to myself, oh, I have to be a little bit more fluid in my gestures. And that is called kinesthetic awareness. When we pianists know how something should feel in our bodies, in our playing apparatus, and we understand what it feels like when something's a little bit off. So when we teach our students, I often ask my pupils, what did you hear? Did you like the sound? Were you satisfied with the sound? And I'll ask, how did it feel? And what did you like about the feeling when you are playing this work or this particular piece or this particular part? I believe that students are never too young to show great artwork too that inspires them. Several years ago, I had a group of students, junior high school students, in a group class, and I had them listen to the Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, followed by Erlkönig by Schubert, two vastly different pieces. And I asked them to draw pictures while they were listening to this music, and their drawings were amazing. On page 10 and 11 of our handout is a marvelous piece by Kevin Olson, and it's called Echoes from Atlantis. Atlantis is a legendary Greek island, first mentioned in the writings of the great philosopher Plato. So this is a late elementary work, and this piece, the student uses a lot of beautiful gestures to make a beautiful sound, dropping and rolling. Nice tissue box, touch release at the end. Ooh, so there's a lot of forward and back towards your body motion. And there's also a good deal of sliding forward into the keys. And the great pianist Arthur Schnabel was a big fan of sliding back and forth on the keys. And of course, Andre Watts was one of his students, and he also used that technique prevalently. So at the top of the page, again, we want our students to feel this kinesthetic awareness. So that they feel very comfortable in all those keys, and they notice if they are starting to feel tight, what is it that's tightening up? Right? Is it their knuckles? Is it their fifth little finger? Is it their wrist? And instead we want them to understand that the more that they can slide forward and back, the more comfortable they're going to be. At the very end, with this little pattern here, it's up here. Can you imagine if the student doesn't ever move their wrist and forearm? It'll sound like this. So everything is very curled and tight, but instead we can tell our students every single one of those notes, let your wrist and your forearm be in another ascending part of the space above the keys. And then it really works beautifully. Let's take a look at our handout on pages 12 and 13. Debussy was interested in Clementi's monumental work of exercises, which are a tour de force for pianists. There are 100 exercises called Gradus ad Parnassum, opus 44. Debussy's Dr. Gradus ad Parnassum is a very humorous way of telling students that they need to practice their technical exercises. In this wonderful early advanced piece by Debussy, students have to learn 3 different physical gestures, or at least apply 3 physical gestures that they've already learned in very quick succession. So in the very beginning of this piece, the student needs to use actually a gentle kickoff, because the wrist and the forearm and the hand move in the same direction, and they certainly are level with each other. And then all of a sudden we have staccato notes on the beats. So now we need to use a motion where the right hand whips around to the left in a circular motion like this. And then all of a sudden we have long notes, quarter notes up at the top melodic line. So again, those are considered to be kickoffs. They're not offs anymore. You're really holding them and making them very nice and legato. So then we have the string of pearls section. Oh my gosh, and it can really all sound kind of mushy. And uninteresting. So how do we get our students to think about pianissimo, followed by another pianissimo phrase, another pianissimo? Oh my goodness. Well, instead of thinking about dynamics, why don't we think about colors? And we'll also have our middle pedal, our sostenuto pedal, help us with these colors. So in the very first phrase of the string of pearls, we could have our students use the middle pedal and maybe half a pedal of the damper pedal. And come off on the damper pedal on the fourth beat, so we hear clarity there. The next measure, let's think of a different, quieter color. Let's use soft, a softer feeling with quarter pedal. So maybe if one was a pale blue, the next one is kind of a chillier, lighter blue. And again, we're coming off the pedal on the fourth beats to hear the harmony. The next one, we can put the middle pedal back on. And then so any way that we can create such a beautiful atmosphere for our music and for our students to really listen and love it. So here's the beginning part of the Dr. Gratis. I love this section. I don't know why this came to my mind just now, but I was thinking of a faded dandelion, and we just blow those dandelion seeds away. And it's just a beautiful feeling of the musical line and the forward drive of it. On page 34 of our handout is the most gorgeous minuet on the name of Haydn. I noticed on the program for this convention that Henry Kramer is speaking about and performing Ravel's Le Tombeau de Couperin. I'm looking forward to that. Ravel discovered Chabrier's music in 1891, and this was absolutely the music he had been seeking. Chabrier was influenced by Renoir, Monet, and Manet. Ravel and his colleague Vinet visited Chabrier and played Chabrier's 3 romantic waltzes for him, and they became fast friends. Ravel's music has clarity to it, with well-defined forms, clear rhythms, and a fusion of different styles, including Spanish, neo-Baroque, neoclassical, and jazz. Melody, harmony, and rhythm are always completely intertwined in his works, and many of his pieces give a feeling of the dance. Ravel is one of my absolute favorite composers. He wrote a very small amount of repertoire, and yet all of it I think is perfect. This is the beginning of the minuet on the name of Haydn. Isn't that so beautiful? Now, there are places in this piece where students, if they have a middle sostenuto pedal, they can definitely use. So at the top of the page, so we still hear the pedal point. Again here, again, and again. Doesn't that sound fabulous? And then on the third line of the second page, they can definitely use this middle pedal while they play all this chromatic harmony. And lo and behold, we still hear that pedal point. Isn't that marvelous? So now I will add the damper pedal and I'll add the rest of the notes. If you look with me on page 35 of your handout, we see The Lake at Evening from Three Tone Pictures, Opus 5 by Charles Tomlinson Griffiths. He was one of the few American Impressionist composers, and Mary Cassatt was one of the few American Impressionist painters. So I thought I would share with you a picture that she painted called Picking Flowers in a Field. There is a poem at the top of the page after the title by William Butler Yeats, and it says, "I hear water lapping with low sounds by the shore." Talking about pedaling in the Impressionist era, all three pedals can be used brilliantly. We want to make sure that when students are using the una corda pedal, they're not using it just to play softer. It really is an entirely different source of tonal color. And we want it to seem like it's a muted kind of sound. So in this beautiful piece, The Lake at Evening, let's go ahead and use the una corda as the composer wanted it. Ask our students, what's the difference between the way I played it that way and this way? Right? And our students who are quite perceptive and they listen well, they'll say, well, the first one was much more veiled, right? Much more quiet. So do you like that one better? Oh yeah, that one is just beautiful. Right, and that's the one that had the una corda pedal throughout. On pages 14 and 15 of our handout, is a beautiful piece called Meditation in the Rain by Timothy Brown. And what a great example of an impressionist piece for an intermediate level student. Oftentimes we'll ask our students, where's the melody of this piece? And they really have to think about it, don't they? Since there are two voices in the right hand, which one has to be brought out or voiced over the other? So, obviously that two-note slur is not part of the main melody. And finger legato is so important so that we can continue all of this legato sound without making the pedal be our crutch. So, it just reminds me, the beautiful beginning of Reflections in the Water also needs a great deal of finger legato. We don't want to hear it played like this. It's not very pretty without finger legato as compared to this. Let's take a look at the most famous Clair de Lune. I also want to share with you a painting by Eugene Chigot, which is also called Clair de Lune. Paul Verlaine wrote the symbolist poem called Clair de Lune in 1869. This was the text Debussy was inspired by for his piano work of the same name. In essence, the poem is about shepherdesses who sing in a minor key, and their song melts away in the light of the moon. I'll just read the last two stanzas for us. While singing in a minor key of victorious love and the pleasant life, they seem not to believe in their own happiness, and their song blends with the light of the moon, with this sad and beautiful light of the moon, which sets the birds in the trees dreaming and makes the fountains sob with ecstasy, the slender water streams among the marble statues. Isn't that beautiful? When students first learn this piece, it's a good idea to have them count in micro beats. So 9 beats for every measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Just for students to get the idea of the clear pulse. So the idea that Debussy was a master at suspension of the tempo. Now we can certainly have our students internalize this rhythm in the 9/8 feeling, but also then make it into big macro beats so that they're only counting 3 beats for every measure. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. Water and light mirrors the sky, and water is like a mirror. There are never straight lines and waves. And the other thing that I've often told my students is water always moves, the current, the ripples. So we always want our students to understand the feeling that Debussy doesn't want to have strict boundaries in his music. Lots of times students play this piece too slowly. So I would think that a comfortable tempo would be metronome around 55 to the dotted quarter note. So in the next page, we want to add in some real rubato. So let's count it in 3. We're not going to be too precise. We're just going to think of this image of this fabulous water. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Have students count out loud because that's the way that they can get the momentum going and understand the rubato. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. At the end of that section, we want our students to feel like they're blowing on hot soup so that these chords can really ring freely. Ooh, and we can go from a big rambunctious sound to calm, calm, calm. One of my students, she got up to that 3rd chord and then she went, da, da, da. And then suddenly there were all these sharks in the water. And I said, what's going on with the left hand with all this motion? And we laughed about it. And I said, no, it has to be really, really, really calm. So no sharks in the water there. What Debussy is known for, Debussy was a master of the suspension of tempo or time. Parallelism, 4ths, 5ths, and octaves, chromaticism, tall chords, 9ths and 11ths, suspended tonal centers, unended or overlapping phrases, subtle changes in tone, dynamics, color, rubato, and whole tone scales. I want to share with you one of my all-time favorite Impressionist painters. This is a painting by Paul Signac, The Grand Canal in Venice. On pages 18 and 19 of our handout is the beautiful Respighi Nocturne. In the beginning of this piece, since this is simpler than Clair de Lune, it's a very good time for our students to think about the suspension of tempo. And we can have our students yawn with these phrases at the beginning and count it in 12/8 time like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So they get the feeling of this very broad landscape at night. So just like Clair de Lune, then we can change the time signature. We can have students count it in 12/8, but then we can also have them count it in 4 for every measure. So on the second page, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm using a little bit of flutter pedal, right? So just at the tip of the pedal. Rosina Levine from the Juilliard School always talked about the 6 levels of the pedal, right? So we have all the way down to the floor, which is 6, and then 5, 4, as we bring our foot up, 3, 2, 1. So flutter pedal is somewhere around 1 and 2 levels at the top of the pedal. And then let's say that a conductor is conducting this piece and the orchestra is playing it. You can imagine the conductor would give really big beats of 2, right? So when the student feels really comfortable with this piece, they could count it in 2. 1, 2. Sorry, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1. Music is so subjective, but we could ask our students which one felt the most comfortable to you, counting it in 12, counting in 4, or changing your time signature to 2 beats to every measure. This is a good piece to use a rubber band in for the rubato. So we can have our students help them make the ends of the phrases a little bit longer and then bring back the tempo in the next phrase in the next measure, and then again when the composer writes tenuto markings, we can stretch the tempo and then go back to normal. On pages 20 through 23 of your handout are some wonderful intermediate level pieces that will help students prepare for impressionistic work. The first one is called In Flight by Mary Leaf. And of course, our students really need to learn how to play scales very agilely and easily. So this is a wonderful piece for that reason. That section at measure 4, leading into measure 5, this would be a great place to do impulse practicing. So have them play those 4 or 5 notes quickly, as if they're just blinking their eye, that quickly. And they'll notice that they have to scoop down and around with a very nice push off, but they're not coming off the key. So nice, easy, clear gossamer scales. And then the next couple pages in the handout is some information as to how to help our students learn how to voice for the first time. And there's a marvelous piece by Kevin Costley called Winter Frost. I like this piece as a precursor to Impressionist music for many reasons. Students have to play triplets alongside quarter notes and eighth note rhythms. I like the idea that there's syncopation between the left hand and the right hand in the B section. And the voicing is really, really fabulous because students have to learn how to balance the top voice along with two inner voices. So in order for students to learn some other techniques that will help them as they find their way through impressionistic music later on, I have my students play things called shimmering scales. And you notice that they are in impulses. We start with 3 notes, then 4 notes, 5 notes. Usually I have students play each one of those impulses 4 or 5 times correctly. And the motion is dropping and then gently pushing off. And they must use correct fingering for those scales. So those are called shimmering scales, and then I do reverse waterfalls, and it's the exact same thing coming down. Like that. There is a wonderful book called Modern Miniatures for Piano Solo, and it's by Diane Gulkazian Rabi, an Armenian composer. And there's a glissando etude in this book that I really like. And this one helps our students to scoop down and around. Isn't that too fun? My gosh. So let's see. Another thing that I like out of this book is that there are so many very cool pieces on intervals. So here's the 4th interval etude. Better piece for a younger student to learn to hear those parallel fourths. Let's see. The other thing we can have our students do is play 2s with 3s in scale, playing like this. To get them used to that, if you want to have your left hand play triplets, it's 2 octaves apart. Students get all mixed up with their fingering, and we say, just keep working on it and you'll get it. On pages 26 and 27 of our handout is a lovely piece called Cassandra's Harp by Timothy Brown. It starts like this. always, Tim has such a marvelous lyrical sense. Gosh, just beautiful melodies he can just pick up from the air. Seems like it. On the last page of this piece is a lovely coda, and the student again has to think about rotation. So back and forth, side to side. And if we are to really teach this well, we're going to have the student drop into the top note and then tap just the thumb, and then have them flip back. Remember, it's called the pancake flipper or the drawbridge. And then go back to the top note. So how long does this take for a student to learn? A while. But then when they actually do that for several weeks, then they have a very shimmering sound. Now this piece is a wonderful precursor for a work like Reflections in the Water by Debussy. Poco andante e placido. E placido is really the Italian word for it, placido, very placid. So there are many different ways to create sound in this first page. And the question is, which one do you and your students like best? So we could do one of three different physical gestures. The first one is stroking towards the body as if you're petting your cat or your dog. So remember that sound. The next one could be a very slow, gentle push off towards the wood of the piano. And the third one is having the wrist come up in different areas of the space above the keys, never leaving the contact of the key. Sorry, it's an A sharp. So you can discuss this with your student. Play these different motions and see what the student likes for their sound. If they can't tell the difference between any of the sounds, then go ahead and use the physical gesture that is the most comfortable for the student. On the second page of this piece, this is why this particular piece is so much like Reflections in the Water. So you know that beautiful section in the Debussy where it goes like this? Right? Oh my goodness. We know that Debussy was probably the first person to ever use parallel octaves in his music. And later on, then, this particular composer said, gosh, I really like what Debussy did. I'm going to do the same thing in this piece. So just a little bit of advice for students that have trouble learning chords. Have them break up the chords, and for a full week, have them only play the top two notes so that they hear this nice fourth interval, And then a whole week of that, have them practice it. And then the week after that, play only the bottom 2 notes so they hear the parallel fifths. And then you could have them do on the 3rd week just the octaves. And then they will be so secure in learning and playing their chords. On page 31 of our handout is this lovely piece called SeaWorld by Dimitar Ninov. He uses rolled chords, chromaticism, and interesting harmonies to make an impressionistic sound. And this is a great place for a squid motion, especially since we're talking about the sea. So the student can play the octave and have them lift their wrist up first and then feel like this is the squid's body and the fingers are the tentacles. And this just relaxes the hand and the fingers. And on the 2nd page, oh my goodness, it just seems like there are fish and turtles just swimming about, enjoying their time under the sea. So that's another marvelous piece for pre-impressionistic work. On the pages of 32 and 33 in your handout is the piece called Cris dans la rue, Clamor in the Street, from Scenes d'Enfant by Federico Bampu. He was a miniaturist. His music is full of delicacy and intimacy. His greatest influence was French Impressionism. His grandfather was a bell maker, and his mom's family owned a bell foundry, and you will hear the sound of bells in the last part that I play. He also loved the cry of seagulls and the sounds of children. I taught this piece to one of my students early in the school year, and we had a lot of fun with it. It's full of life, and we could certainly concoct a great story that went along with this piece. At first she looked at it and she said, "Of course." What do you think she said? "What about those bar lines? That's really interesting." I said, "Yeah, I know, it is." And she said, "And all those slurs." I said, I know, it's pretty interesting, isn't it? It's kind of non-conventional writing. And I said, but this piece will use a lot of pedal, and once you start to play it, you're going to understand what this composer is after. So in this first section, those chords replicate the clamor in the streets. And it's a really nice idea. You know, remember that squid touch release I showed you in that SeaWorld piece? It's perfect for when a student plays faster as well. In this way, they won't play with stretching and reaching all the time, which will, of course, make the wrist and the fingers really tight and uncomfortable. So have them practice with this squid motion and have them relax their little squid tentacles when they come up. And then drop, release all of their tension. And then we decided that this would be children bouncing a ball in the streets. And then again, rest. And then this next section, very fast, this was the section which he had the most trouble with. And part of the reason was because we were talking about a swan gesture. So we want the student to feel like they're dropping And then they are coming out with both of their elbows and their arms. So you can imagine what the student was having difficulty with was to hit the second beats and making all of the inner voices just as loud as the top melody. So we spent a lot of time kind of brushing off those inner notes and then voicing the top of the third beat. And then there's this beautiful calm section. And of course, we talked about the church bells ringing in the village. So this is a wonderful piece talking about children who are clamoring in the streets, playing ball. And in that middle section, we said we have to use quite a bit of pedal because we need to fill in all the sidewalk cracks. So we had a lot of fun with that, and I hope that you do too. As you know, there is so much to explore within this incredible genre of composition, and students can enjoy Impressionism at every stage of their progress. Thank you for tuning in to see my presentation.